Hello and welcome to your New Year's Day episode of Thinking Critically, a D&D discussion, a podcast where we deep dive single word concepts or ideas within the Dungeons & Dragons 5e framework. My name is Danilo, and I like all kinds of games and the crunchy mechanics that make him tick. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, and I'd really appreciate a like or a follow. Today, I'm joined by Tim, who plays Ulrik in our Dungeons, Dice and Dudes actual play podcast. Please do check us out. Thanks again for coming on, Tim. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, you're welcome. Pleasure to be here, as they say. I'm Tim, as Danilo said, and I play Ulrik in our D&D campaign podcast that we do. Also, I manage the socials as well. That's my job for my part, which is always fun. Not the best at it, but still learning, you know.
And the teas and the coffees as well.
And I was named in like the first episode we went live as like the producer of the show, because I kept having all these grand ideas and like, you paying for all this, Tim? Is that your role? But alas, that's not so. But I'm a huge nerd, have been for a long time. Been playing D&D on and off for 10, 15 years, something like that, as a small child with my brother's friends. So always been a huge fan of it, and it was not until a couple of years ago that I got back into it hard with fellow podcastee Nathan, who was on last week. Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, he kind of got me into it again with Rob, who's also been on this podcast as well. So, you know, lots of fan favourites, I'm sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I just love D&D, love talking about it, and have love of many tabletop games. In all fairness, I'm a big fan of Warhammer 40k, which I'm sure some of you enjoy too, especially the lore as well. That is always good fun.
Yes, I probably pissed off a few people in my talk with Nathan about Warhammer 40k.
Oh, really? No.
It's okay. I was really into it at one point. It's okay. I'm allowed to say things.
Okay, we'll just brush that past, shall we? Brush into that, yeah.
Cool. So thank you very, very much for coming on. Today's topic is all about time. So, for starters, Tim the Time Man.
Tim the Time Man, yeah.
What does time mean to you, Tim?
When you asked me what stuff I wanted to talk about, and you said time, I was like, yeah, that's a great one. And then I just didn't realize the gravity of like how big a subject time is.
Yep, that's something I've wrestled with in every episode before this one.
Yeah, it's like some big subjects, but to boil it down to like real brass tacks stuff, like, yes, there's loads of sciencey stuff and science fiction stuff around time and like time and space and the link between them and relativity and Einstein and all that crazy stuff. But for us mere mortals, I'd kind of say that time for me is just like the measure of just how things change in your life and in everything around you. That's kind of how I would see time as such. I did a little bit of research about time for this podcast, and I came across quite an interesting article written by some physicists about the order of time. It was very dramatic, I have to say. But there was one quote in it which kind of put things in perspective a little bit for me, which is, time is an illusion, and our naive perception of how it flows doesn't correspond to actual physical reality, which kind of really spoke to me in the level of, we can think we know what time is, but it doesn't actually correspond to how we perceive it or look at it. It's all in our heads, effectively.
So suddenly my notes about is 6 seconds a combat turn, it looks completely redundant now.
Well, no, because I also have stuff on that as well. I just like, as an overarching thing, I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like, I like this. Yeah. And it does kind of correlate into like D&D a little bit as well, and a lot as well. It's just kind of like, I just thought that was really interesting, that even regardless of how time is a concept, it doesn't matter, because it's just how we perceive it at the end of the day. I was probably a little bit too big brain, but
a galaxy brain. Like, I'm not prepared for this. I just gotta get my thesaurus real quick.
But like, yeah, it's just how things change. I'd say is the best way of describing it for me, as on a personal thing.
Yeah, no, that's good, and one of the reasons why I love, when I'm knee deep in editing, sometimes it's difficult to have the strength to be like, man, is this worth it? But the moment, pretty much every time I've started recording with somebody and that opening question is, what does it mean to you? I can't think of a time where it's been exactly how I've approached it. So that's really good, because I was really in the mire of, I mean, I've got a few notes on, character aging and the progress of time in a campaign, but not from a point of view of entropy, essentially, that's what the passage of time brings us all towards, this entropic state. I've just got to try and put my big boy pants on and figure out how to now apply that to
well
to
that was just kind of like my overall thought. The rest of the stuff I want to talk about, at least, is very D&D centric, if you like. It has everything to do with like the mechanics and how it affects like character development and role play and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, because I literally went to Google and was like, what is time? And that's kind of what I came across. So yeah, it was fun.
I've got this image of you sitting in like a lounge with, a mug of hot chocolate, big thick glasses on, a robe. What is time?
It's time. Yeah, I had like some brandy and like a cigar.
I mean, here's a thought that I've just had to tie it in. So there's a meme that goes around that's like 5 minutes when you're in school, and the clock is like 4 hours long, or it's how 5 minutes feels when it's you're playing a video game and it just flies by, kind of thing. When you're playing or DMing, are sessions too long? How do they feel? Do you enjoy yourself the entire time? I personally feel that I often come out of sessions, especially those where I'm DMing, but to a lesser extent those that I'm playing, quite drained.
Yeah.
And I think one part of that, now I'm thinking about it, is this kind of compression of time. Almost. I find it tiring to rubber band time. So for one moment you can say 7 months has passed because you've been travelling on a ship. Okay, right, that's a lot of time to have just passed in the blink of the eye. And then on the second hand, in combat, to deftly tie it in to my first point of it only being 6 seconds, and the amount of times that I've been asked halfway through combat or at the end of like, okay, well, how long have I got left on this spell? It's only a minute. And I go, well, it's only 3 rounds, so it's not even been half a minute yet. So, and that kind of compression and expansion of time is quite tiring. I don't know what your thoughts are on, time in a session, I suppose.
Yeah, it's definitely a very odd mechanic of the game, because it really depends on. Well, it's very situational. Like, I was talking to Sai about it the other day, actually, and he kind of described it the best for me, like scenes in films and stuff. It really depends on how the director wants you to perceive the time in that scene as such. And I guess that directly applies to how the DM wants you to perceive time in either combat or actually the RP that you're doing. It's all down to what they want, which is kind of why DMing is kind of like being God a little bit, because you are in control of time in a way.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah.
But yeah, like you can have a director take a very long time over just one moment, which could take maybe a minute or so. Like you have those films that last like 2-3 hours that are meant to be just like one day, or you can have a film that is 2 or 3 hours and is over years and years and years of actual time in the characters' lives. And yeah, it can be really disjoints in your head, kind of like if you're seasick, that kind of thing. If you're flipping between like different time zones in your head, and that could definitely be tiring for sure.
I was just thinking there, it's like the Total War series of games where you have the country level of here are my cities and here are my soldiers, but then when you go down into a fight, you zoom all the way down to the boots on the ground kind of thing. And I think campaigns can kind of be like that, with that rubber banding of, okay, well, we're here, we need to go over there, that's going to take 2 days worth of walking.
Yeah.
And as I've discussed on previous episodes, I'm a fan of, the combat having a meaning, having a purpose. So, there's not just going to be arbitrary combats in the wilderness just for the sake of it, unless, of course, it drives home that the wilderness is super dangerous and you're going to die. Then it makes sense. But otherwise, those 2 days can pass relatively quickly. And then when you get into town, it suddenly, puts the brakes on again to do that micro kind of boots on the ground kind of stuff. So
Yeah. In 5th at least, you have this kind of 6-second rule for combat and stuff. And that is like a limitation that the game puts on you for combat. But outside of that, I'd say time is more used kind of like as a narrative tool. I've heard of people using campaign like really time-centrically. So like each task that you perform has to take a certain amount of time, and the characters have to keep track of that and know how long things take and how long spells take to cast. And I guess a good example that we can tie it into our campaign that we're part of is my character's time he has left as such. Obviously, he has a clock on that. Like that kind of overshadows now my decisions as a player, how I approach certain situations and stuff. But
I see what you're getting at. That like in combat, it's a mechanical framework in the same way that spell slots are a mechanical framework. But outside of combat, it fulfills a completely different purpose of being this kind of external antagonist in a way.
Yeah.
Putting pressure on the party and providing a source of conflict. And I'm really trying to hit all the topics of my previous podcasts in one sentence.
Synergy, as they say. Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm a huge fan of trying to drill in that idea to my players of everything takes time. So I, in earlier sessions, go quite hard on people being like, I check for traps. And I go, okay, that's going to take an hour.
Yeah.
You're in enemy territory. You don't know where you are. You can't see more than 60 feet ahead of you. Do you want to spend an hour combing every brick for pressure plates beneath it? And suddenly they're like, ooh, maybe I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Because that initial thought is just, I check for traps. Ding, no traps. Cool. Fine, we're safe now. When I'm really trying to build a world that's like, no, you can't just do that for free. There's a cost there, and the cost isn't just the dice roll. The cost is you've got to expend time and effort doing it. You can't just extend your senses and innately know that there's no traps in the area. You've got to check. You've got to get a little knife out, put it between the bricks, jiggle it around. Is there any give there? So I'm really trying to level that in. And the same with like ritual spell casting, which is of course 10 minutes. So I'm always like, okay, well, that person's just sitting on their ass for 10 minutes. What's everyone else doing? Sitting in silence? Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, it not only like grounds your players in realism, but it definitely raises the stakes of everything you do within the game. Like, if there's no time that you keep a track of, then a lot of it becomes meaningless because you just do these things when you say them and they don't have any actions or consequences. It's just happening around you and that kind of stuff. But as soon as you say, oh, this will take this amount of time and this will have this effect on you, like my best example I can think of is similar to like your traps and stuff, but when you're on like a big dungeon crawl with your party and stuff, and they're in there for a very long time and they've done lots of checking your traps and the torches have been on for a long time and it's getting darker and darker because the torches are going out slower and slower, and the more time that they're in the dungeon, the perhaps more monsters notice that they're in the dungeon and in wherever they are, and it gets more and more dangerous. Yeah, it's a really great tool to kind of give your players that sense of urgency, I guess, about what the situation they're in, or like a proper grounding in realism, which again just helps them become more engaged and have a better time, I'd say.
Yeah, now we're talking about it, I'm seeing it more as I think I thought about it as, but now I'm really seeing it as a resource in the same way that Action Surge and spell slots are a resource to be spent. Then time is also a resource to be spent by the players, and any semi-serious campaign will have some kind of clock ticking. The players might not know it, or the characters might not know it, but there will be a bad person somewhere doing bad things while the players don't do anything. So an example from my current campaign is they're in a pretty typical kobold dungeon. Warrenous, small tunnels everywhere, very claustrophobic, very difficult to navigate, looping paths, traps, all that kind of stuff. And they decided to bust in quite loudly. They'd had a piece of combat with some of the kobolds. One escaped with its life to some other part of the tunnel, and then after that they decided to take stock, return to the entrance and take a short rest, of which gave the kobolds all the time in the world to prepare and to plan, and they'd heard the combat. One had come back to say, hey, here's who's attacking us, here's their numbers, here's what they can do, let's get ready, because they've disappeared for a bit. So my players are all like, oh, let's go, we should be fine now, we've killed a lot of them. And I had to say, well, yeah, but you've also done nothing for 60 minutes, so the world hasn't stopped moving.
Yeah,
you've spent that resource of time, and you've basically paid it to the enemies.
Yeah, and now that you've said that time in D&D is definitely a resource, it makes so much more sense now as a mechanic. Definitely, like, I just want to go back to the point that it definitely just grounds and makes those players fear for their characters in a way that you wouldn't have unless you implemented that kind of stuff. And that's a really cool example of that. I'm definitely going to use that at some point when I DM.
I think a thought just came to me, a good kind of other side of the same coin, and a lot of this podcast we fall back on video game knowledge, which is my other primary passion.
Yeah, same.
is the Souls series.
Okay, yeah.
Notorious for the fact that you can't pause them.
Yeah.
And that every action you do takes some time, be it to drink a potion. So it's not like, say, Skyrim, where you can pause the game as a dragon's about to incinerate you.
Yeah.
Eat 50 cheese wheels in an instant, and suddenly you're fighting fit again. You can't do that in the Souls games, because they are saying, much like D&D, funnily enough, not a parallel I would have naturally drawn until we've started talking about it today, to say, no, okay, you can drink a potion, an Estus flask, but that's going to take some time, and the enemies are still going to keep wailing on you. And that's the kind of environment I want to build in my D&D campaign, to say, yeah, you can rest at a bonfire for an hour, but the enemies are still going to be kicking around.
Still actually moving within the universe you've created. I mean, it just makes it more rewarding as well. Like, going back to the Souls games, I've had really passionate discussions with people about how they're the best games they've ever played, because of the level of realism in the stuff you just talked about, and how difficult the combat is, and how you can get so far in like a boss fight and stuff, and then if you like make a mistake right at the end, or during with like getting a potion timing wrong, or getting one of your rolls incorrectly, and it's all done, and you're dead there and then after like 20 minutes of fighting this boss. And it's heartbreaking when it happens, but at the same time, when you put in all that effort into the fight, and it succeeds, and you manage to kill that boss or whatever, then I've had lots of discussion with people saying like that's why they love that game so much, is because it's so rewarding when you get it right. And again, I love D&D for a ton of different reasons, but we both definitely put in a lot of time and effort into it. And when things go perfect, and you get that natural 20 on an attack that is just perfectly set up, and like you get ridiculous damage, and everything just like falls in place perfectly. Yeah, it's so rewarding, and without the time and effort you put into that, it definitely does. It wouldn't be as meaningful to me, at least.
For sure. I think that's a thought that a number of people have had as we sit down to do these kind of discussions, in that the old adage of the more you put in, the more you get out is really quite true for D&D, in a really kind of distilled fashion. It's probably the best way to put it.
Yeah.
To ground us for a second and bring us back down, I saw a Reddit post a little while ago, and there's in the same way that, to use the film analogy from before, films often will skip the boring parts, as it's called. So you don't ever see Jason Bourne, sitting on the toilet.
My God, it's Jason Bourne.
Sitting on the toilet eating a Rustlers.
Exactly,
right?
Yeah.
And the same is often the case for D&D, where DM is never like, oh, you haven't taken a toilet break in 6 hours, take a level of exhaustion because you piss your pants.
Yeah.
Because that's not that exciting,
yeah,
in my opinion. The Reddit post, however, said, don't skip those boring parts, because they give player characters time to shine. How do you feel about that?
It's really tricky, because again, you don't want to waste time. I mean, it is obviously quite precious. Going after these quite mundane things, and making sure that all the mechanics are followed to the letter, and that every little single thing is how it should be. because you can lose a bit of the narrative element of it. Like life itself, if you played it out exactly perfectly, wouldn't be particularly exciting, but you have these very exciting set pieces, if you like, where stuff happens in them. So like if you only had the boring bits, that would suck. But again, if you only had the exciting bits, yeah, that'd be entertaining, but it wouldn't be very realistic. So you definitely have to find a decent balance as such. And I don't know about you, but I've definitely found like the best RP that I've definitely been a part of has been during like traveling somewhere or doing something mundane, like going to watch for the evening to make sure we don't get killed or whatever. And the funniest RP that I've been a part of has been during those little moments rather than like the big grandiose plot points that have happened. So yeah, there's definitely a balance to be found.
Yeah, and you said there about tying into not wasting time, and we just spent 10 minutes talking about how you shouldn't waste time because it's a resource. I think there's an element of it's that trust that I talk about in another episode between the player and the DM. So the players need to trust the DM to not be like, oh, that was a really heartfelt moment you had, that was really good, nice role play, really enjoyed it. Your parents had died because you were too slow. Like that, because that's just not fun. So the DM's got to see the wood for the trees and be like, okay, no, I'll give them these 5 minutes because that was really good play. And the players need to be like, okay, I'm not going to take the piss here. But if we keep dicking around doing superfluous things, then he's going to bite us in the arse. But we can trust him to allow us time to roleplay, essentially.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we're playing a game to have fun, and there are lots of elements of the game that make it more fun, or you can obviously take it very seriously because you get a lot of fun from doing that as well. But to be a real like stickler for like little things like that and very pernickety, and if it doesn't sit well with your players and they don't kind of like that, then maybe that's not the best option to kind of use time in that way. Yeah. End of the day, as a DM, you have a responsibility to tell a decent story and to have your players engage with that. And very often, if you approach it like that, you lose out on a lot of things if you do it like that, for sure.
So, talking of interactions between players, there is often a trap that has happened in every single game I've ever played in, where at some point that doesn't happen and the players' characters have to split up for whatever reason. So a split party. So the way this ties in to time is, how do you manage two independent streams of time that are in parallel in the real world, but potentially very not in parallel in the game world?
Yeah.
What do you think is the best way to reconcile those and manage it at the table?
That's really tough. I've fortunately never had to DM with a split party because I worry about it. I have nightmares about about that kind of thing. And from listening to Critical Role and seeing other people DM and stuff like that, I feel like it is a fear of many DMs, a split party, because it involves a lot more thinking and keeping track of stuff than you already have to do, which is quite a lot. In terms of dealing with it, though, again, it's how the DM wants to use time in their game. Like, you could have set amounts of minutes or days of how long tasks take, or we could make it even simpler than that. I feel like when I've seen other people DM, they say, cool, you've done a number of things now, 2 or 3 things, that's enough, we'll move over to the other side of the table and let you guys do 2 or 3 things. Again, it's how intricate you want to be with it. Personally, I'd probably just be like, you've done 2 things, those tasks are complete, we'll move over to the other side of the table now. But what about you? What would you do in that situation?
It's a judgment call and an experience call, I would say, and I don't want to sound like I'm up on my my ivory tower casting judgment on everybody below, but
well, you are the guru of D&D in my eyes, so
I'm flattered, thank you. I am lucky in reality that I have a good intuition and sense for stoking those fires. So the way I'm visualizing it quite dynamically in my head at the table is basically those sitting around the table opposite me are their own kind of little furnaces, and I can go and stoke them for 5 to 10 minutes, which will give them life for maybe 15 to 20 minutes, and then I just bounce around, and I just kind of have this innate intuition, which I know is no help to anybody else, but you can build that as a skill to say, okay, I've probably left Joe Bloggs for a little bit, and I know him as a player, and I know he's got quite high demands, so I need to kind of go back to him maybe quicker than I need to go back to somebody else who's actually quite okay just to be kind of a passive participant. So maybe I only need to bounce to them every half an hour, but the other people I can go to maybe every 10 minutes or so. But that's not only a DM experience, but also an experience of your table specifically, and the players are at it. And some people are like, no, I'm happy to watch, forget about me, we can do me at another time or in between sessions, that's okay. And others are like, God, what's happening? I really need to know now, or I'm just going to completely check out. So it's that thought process, and yeah, literally for me, it's a case of I almost consider each part or each team a session. So just like yourself and probably most other DMs, there'll be an allowance for actions that have a certain length of time to do something. So say one people stayed at the tavern and a couple of people went to a shop to buy some potions. So maybe that party, they turn up to the shop, they get introduced, and they ask for, how much does this cost? So in the same way that I manage an individual session, I'll tend to manage those little snippets in the same way. And by that, I mean, I want to cut away at an exciting time.
Yeah.
So when they say, how much does this cost? I might say, oh, well, the shopkeeper kind of scratches his chin, looks a bit wily. Anyway, back to the inn.
Yeah. but that is such a fantastic narrative tool. Everyone has probably seen the subreddit, Perfectly Cut Screams.
Oh, yeah.
Or like the To Be Continued meme. Mm-hmm. All those kind of things rely on that trope of cutting away from the action at the perfect time to you almost get it, but you don't quite. And I love that kind of stuff. It really excites me because then you're like, oh, what was that? What was that? And then it's really good way of building suspense. And to go back to how you manage it with like a specific different people and stuff like that, knowing and having that experience with your players and knowing how they would react to certain things. Again, time really links into experience quite a lot. I don't know if you've done a podcast on experience already. I don't want to step on any.
We did, yeah, but it was a completely different take on what we're about to be talking about, I imagine. So
okay, cool.
But maybe those people should listen to it if they want to hear a completely
maybe they
take.
should go back and listen to that podcast for sure. Yeah, but the more time you spend with your people you play D&D with, the better experience you have with them. Like the other day when me and you did that one shot, and I was running, I was really, really impressed with how well you guys as players immediately pick up on something that is a bit and just completely run with it. And I don't think when we first started playing together that would have necessarily happened, but the experience and the time that we spent with each other means that we just know how we react to certain things and how we play the game as such, and it made for a wonderful time on my part, at least, is watching that unfold. I've seen so many memes of like D&D memes of when you see your players have half an hour of RP and you don't say anything at all, and you're just silently smiling to yourself because it's exactly how you wanted it to go.
Yep.
And yeah, I do really love that kind of, you sit back as a DM, you've set up a situation for them, and your players just envelop themselves in the universe. They just have such a good time with it, and that definitely comes with time and effort and experience and all those wonderful things that seem to tie in so well together. Yeah,
I said it at the time, and I'll say it now. I think that all of us, and especially yourself, considering there's such short notice, we all of us had short notice, and to come out the other side with somehow a very coherent, everybody on the same page, all the players working together, all the characters working together, and enabled and facilitated by the DM, considering I would say it's fair to say maybe only out of the theme you had in mind as the DM, maybe only a fraction of that was maybe used by the players.
The notes and stuff I'd written up. I think this is a common DM issue, is you write a load of stuff and you expect certain things to happen, and they do not happen the way that you plan out in your head, and time is spent on a very specific thing, like going to look for cigars and a can of prunes. Yep. And not at all like looking for monsters and talking to the right people to get the right information to move the story forward. Yeah, that's definitely a horrible thing when that happens. Yeah.
When Simon, who talked about happiness with me, was preparing for a one shot, he was like, I need your help. I said, okay, fine. He said, I'm planning. Do you think, I've planned for 3 combat encounters. Do you think I need more? And I was like, man, that's probably like 7 sessions worth. I said, one piece of combat is probably good enough.
Yeah.
Maybe 2 if the first one is very trivial. And he was like, yeah, you're right. And then he cast his mind back to previous sessions and previous one-shots. And was like, I've just wasted my own time there, kind of planning when it's not, especially with us, you're never going to hit that 3 combat encounters in his example.
Yeah, unless your players are really efficient and know exactly how things go, and you've made the encounters quite easy in ways you're never going to get 3 encounters done. I had planned 3 encounters for the one shot as well. I guess I knew in the back of my head that you wouldn't get that far.
Yeah.
Technically, I had 4 encounters planned because there was one that was like a seriously unlikely thing to happen.
Okay. Yeah, back pocket kind of thing.
Just like a little, you roll a natural 1 when you're trying to stealth, and then a herd of zombies appear.
Yes. Yeah.
that kind of thing. But yeah, it can definitely never go as it's planned. But we've gone off topic a lot here, I think.
No, I like it because it's I was just about to say, like, it's still all related to time, right? The time that someone spends planning, and we've just given 2 really good examples there of how that, in reality, rarely stacks up in terms of how long the players are going to take to get through it.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of rubber banding in my own preparation for my campaign. So if it's kind of newish stuff or the lull between chapters, which sounds unintuitive, but I actually find that harder to prepare because it's a lot more open and a lot more, free form, and they're just in a town or in some place of safety. And there it's a lot more like, oh God, they could go here, they could go there. I've got to think about, 3 or 4 different possible avenues. And that takes up a lot of time to plan. And then the sessions still go much shorter than I anticipated. And even now, that still is the case for me. Every session, still, I'm surprised at how little we get through. I don't think I've ever had a single session where it's been the other way around, ever, in over 50 that I've DM'd. Probably over 60 that I've DM'd. I've not had one single session with the 3 or 4 different parties that have gone the other way around.
Yeah, I wonder if there's any DMs out there that have actually planned a whole session and the players have gotten through all of it. I don't think that's ever a thing.
It just doesn't exist. That's the unicorn of D&D.
Yeah, we found it. We found the unicorn.
The perfect one shot. And then you wake up and it was just all a dream anyway.
It's just all a dream,
yeah. But then, like, when they're in a dungeon, which is this kobold dungeon they're in now, I've basically had to do no prep. So I've had a lot of spare time for quite a few weeks. Yeah, there's, some encounters need to be tweaked, and there's some little bits that I can retcon in and think about the bigger picture. But in terms of the nitty-gritty, like, okay, shit, we're playing tomorrow. I've got to put some things together. I don't really have to do that, because the dungeon's been made. It was made, like, 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And, once they finally got to it, it's a bit of an overhead at the start. There's a bit of front loading you have to do. But then once they've got to it, at that time, my personal time flips around completely on its head to in between prep is kind of small. Yeah, is the map on the tabletop? Yeah. Okay. Is the combat, have I set the tokens up? Yeah. Okay. Fine. Have I done the episode intro? Yeah, cool. Done. between like, here's an NPC, here's his needs, wants and flaws, here's the shop he runs, okay, here's the other shop that they might want to go to because it's a shopping episode, here's his NPC, here's his...
Yeah, I imagine those, I haven't DM'd a lot, but I imagine those are probably the worst to prepare for, like the episodes where your characters are not really in combat, and you have to go through RP with them, have the world properly fleshed out, so if they go down an alleyway and find something that you weren't expecting, you can react to that in the right way. But that's kind of the fun of it for a lot of DMs is when you make that universe and you like live it in your head, you can react to anything that happens in it, really. Yeah, for sure. And I'd say that I'm definitely very much I do a lot of improvising when I'm DMing, and in life I'd say I do that as quite a lot as well. Because I don't prepare as much as I should do for a lot of stuff, and including when I'm DMing, and I feel like I've gotten quite good at just improvising situations and coming up with stuff on the spot, and I find that a lot more fun than doing loads and loads and loads and loads of prep and having absolutely every situation planned out and perfect. Yeah. And just seeing what happens naturally and what naturally kind of organically is created by you and your players. I find that much more interesting than over planning what's going to happen, for sure.
For sure. Yeah, likewise. And I think doing a lot of that kind of prep up front, spending a lot of time to do it, can be a bit of a crutch for me, at least, in terms of, well, I know how I want this NPC to react, and you can't help but let that bias you as a DM a little bit to be like maybe slightly more of a bastard to the players because you've got like quite a hard theme in your head, whereas if it's a kind of aloof Dad's Army shopkeeper that you've just magicked up out of thin air, and it's literally just bouncing between improvisation and improvisation between yourself and a couple of the players, then I think because you don't have that crutch to stand on, you've got a lot more freedom to be like, oh, okay, actually he's gonna do this time.
Do this, yeah. But on the flip side of that, some characters you really need to have that prep in. Some things require a detailed background, like something super crazy that you've prepared, just so when the players do spend the time kind of discovering all that, it's super rewarding for them because you've clearly put in the time for that.
Yes.
So yeah, again, like we've discussed previously, it's balanced as all things should be, you know.
So I saw a post on Twitter a little while ago that posed the question of how can you play a young wizard? The point being is that the nature of the class implies that they're a learned academic, and in a lot, not all, but a lot of the artwork, and certainly in earlier editions, you know, in first and second ed, when it was literally just like fighter, wizard, cleric, and rogue. Yeah. The wizard was always like Gandalf.
Yeah,
so I'm old and frail,
but have experience. Yeah,
yeah, but that's why I'm a wizard. So, what do you think about that? Like, how would you play a young wizard? How would you how is that possible? Is it possible?
The first thing that popped into my head as soon as you said young wizard was, have you ever read Terry Pratchett books?
No, can't say I have.
So he wrote a ton of books, like a series on the universe he created called Discworld novels.
Yep, familiar with the universe, yeah.
And like, there's one that is around, it's called Equal Rights, and it's around the very first female wizard. And it's such a crazy thing in the world. But they have, like, in that universe, there's a wizard college, which they go to. And there's a really funny young wizard who is incredibly naturally talented and knows and reads loads of books and has all this knowledge and has so much power, but is like a bit clumsy with it and doesn't quite know how to control it. And I definitely take a lot of inspiration from that if I was playing a very young wizard, because without the experience to kind of control very powerful magic, you would probably mess up quite a lot with that, I imagine. Yeah. So I think I'd like to if I was playing a very young wizard, have a chat with the DM and be like, look, this is how I wanted to play him. Can you maybe take from like wild magic stuff and maybe roll every time I do a spell to see if it goes correctly or whatever, or have a little bit of fun that way, just to kind of impound the lack of experience that this wizard may have. Yeah, that's one kind of take I'd put on it.
Yeah, I sometimes I find it odd that question's posed when, especially now with the release of Tasha's, you can pretty much have any race be any class, and still be very effective. And people are still asking, well, how can you have a young wizard when they're meant to be very learned? And it's like, well, you can have whatever the hell you want.
Yeah.
don't be constrained just because it says you got to be learned.
Yeah.
You know, just do whatever you want. I always design a character like form and function in unison. So class and backstory and race, for that matter, all in unison. And I try to never let one preclude the other. So as we know from Quinn, from Dungeons, Dice and Dudes, he is very much not some 80-year-old kind of frail. He's just a dude.
Yeah.
He's just a dude in a dungeon with some dice.
In a dungeon with some dice. Speaking of which, if you want to follow Dungeons, Dice and Dudes on Instagram and follow us there. No,
well, you sound like the social media manager for these guys. Is that
funny you'd say that? That's definitely what I am. Yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting class to talk about because none of the others. I mean, it's weird. It's both none and all of them. So you could level the same argument at, say, clerics and paladins and say, well, surely they have to devote their life to a religion before they can start to gain these benefits.
Yeah.
And any skill takes time to learn. So why are there a shitload of 18-year-old emo rogues when doing sneak attack isn't just something you just learn like Oliver Twist? Like he had to learn.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's the same way with everybody. Just, while they were studying the blade, I studied the book.
Yeah, that is definitely true, and it ties into experience, obviously. But in real life, there are tons of people who have crazy natural ability, just amazing dancers or amazing at a particular sport, that kind of thing. So you could definitely make the argument that your character in D&D is just naturally very talented, doesn't he, to spend all that time on learning his craft as such.
I agree in that there's people that have. Some people are better at some things than others. That's just life, right? That's just a nature, nurture, the whole thing put together. Yeah. So, and in the same way, the D&D universe is the same. And I like to think that for most characters, they have an intuition for playing music and drawing the weave out of the universe. You're a bard. Okay,
casual
great.
weave out of the universe.
Yeah, as you do. You're slamming your harmonica. But what I thought I had is it'd actually be a really cool character to play. To be one who hasn't, and he's maybe like a fighter, but he's had to really train super hard to be a fighter for 60 years, and even at 60 years old, he's only level 1. Whereas if you juxtapose him next to a charlatan street urchin who's literally just got by on luck. He tripped and his knife fell out of his pocket and it stabbed somebody who was mugging him. Oh, well, fine. I'm now rich and can, this, that, and the other. That would be a really good friction there between the two characters to be like, you are a bastard and I hate you because you're just naturally good at this. And I had to spend my whole fucking life, dedicated my life to training. And that's a really good character idea there to be like, no. And the book, some people don't like maths or aren't very good at maths, and they have to work really, really, really hard at maths to even come out the other side. As much as some people are just like, I can just see the numbers move on the page and they turn into the answer, and it just makes sense to me.
Yeah, I hate people like that. That's so annoying.
Yeah, tell me about it. But everyone comes out with a B in GCSE maths, right? So it's so that'd be a really interesting. I think to have you could juxtapose a really old wizard next to a really young prodigy who's just I don't know, I just wave my wand and read some words and fire comes out. It's pretty cool.
And that's it. That's how I roll, isn't it?
Yeah. Next to someone who's like, no, you have to train, and it's not fair.
Yeah, exploring that difference would be very fun. RPing that for sure. Having two characters bounce off each other, basically arguing about what the right way to do something is. Yeah,
you've got pre-baked character arcs in both of them then, and then they can both, meet in the middle, and the young person could be like, no, I've got to respect my elders, and the older person can be like, hey, no, he's naturally talented, and I shouldn't be bitter about his success, and you've got a lovely 2-character arc story there, pre-baked.
Oh yeah, for sure. And then you could leave it on such a wholesome note and be like, it's fine, everybody's different, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. You're like a son. You were a brother to me.
You're my brother, Anakin. Sorry, can't help that.
Yeah, well, I set you up.
Yeah. Any chance I have to quote Star Wars, I probably will. So.
Hey man, I'm fresh off the back of episode 1 the other day, so.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Little treat. Going back in time.
Yeah.
So, talking about another thing that takes time in game. If we talk about something mechanically now, and then we'll loop back round to maybe a higher level. It's a thing. I was going to talk about rests, and we've mentioned them briefly earlier on, but we talk about them in a bit more detail now. So the alternative rules. I'm not sure if you're aware that the Dungeon Master Guide provides alternative rules for. I think it's literally called gritty realism for rests.
Wow. I know I don't think I've come across this before.
Yep, so the standard rest is, a short rest is 1 hour and a long rest is 8 hours, and basically you could be, basically have all your arteries severed, but as long as you go to bed and have a dinner, you'll wake up and you'll be good to go, which you can brush away under they're an adventurer and they're kind of got some magic in them that kind of helps them.
Mm-hmm.
So the rules for gritty realism are, they basically crank it up, so a short rest is essentially the same as a long rest, so a short rest is 8 hours. And the long rest is, I think, a week.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which makes a lot more sense in terms of, I've got to sit in casts for 7 days and have a splint put in and be on IV because...
Yeah, have my hoons properly dressed. And
Yeah. Fighting a beholder broke every bone in my body and I can't just sleep that off.
Yeah, that is proper realism, that,
Yeah, so I don't know, what are your thoughts about that and how it impacts the time and the resources and how it will change how the players are going to play, I suppose, their characters?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of, again, what you want your players to experience. If they are really into the survival part of playing D&D and the mechanics and stuff, and making sure that they bandage each wound and they have to think about if they've been stabbed and how that's going to affect their organs and stuff like that, and getting really, really nitty gritty into how they would heal over time, making sure they have the right potions and spells and stuff, and they find a lot of joy out of that, then 100% I would go ham on realism. And it's why a lot of really famous RPG games have a hardcore mode.
Mm-hmm.
Fallout definitely has a hardcore mode where you have to think about making sure you eat regularly and have enough water, and all of the things that you pick up have proper weights, and you have to constantly be thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're really into that kind of stuff, it can make the game be super engaging and realistic, and you get a lot of fun out of it. But at the same time, if you're not into that, then maybe that would be the worst thing in the world, having to constantly be thinking about going into combat and worrying about, I'm quite a small human, that means I can get damaged quite easily, and having to be really cautious and careful and overthink literally every encounter that you have with somebody in case it goes wrong and you have to fix it in some way. So, like I keep saying in this podcast, it seems having a good balance would probably be preferable.
Mm-hmm.
Nathan, in our campaign, I think he's gone for a bit of realism in when we go down or are unconscious during combat. If we are brought back afterwards, there is a consequence to that. We're not just fine afterwards. We have either some visible damage on us, or we have some kind of disadvantage for a long period of time because we're perhaps not at full strength.
Yeah.
I was getting very frustrated as Ulrik when he... should I say spoilers? I don't know. Yeah. Spoilers, he dies.
Which time?
No, stop it. And then that has a knock-on effect when he's brought back, especially in the manner that he's brought back.
Mm-hmm.
For a long period of time, he has levels of exhaustion, and that doesn't go straight away just after having a long rest or just eating. Nathan definitely imposed quite a lot of disadvantage on me because of that. And yes, it's frustrating, but it makes sense, and it makes every encounter I went into, I had to think more about it, and I had to kind of plan a bit more as a player, not the character. My character would never plan anything in his life, but it definitely brought like a new level of gameplay for me, which was a lot of fun. So like things like that can definitely improve your player's experience. But yeah, I guess does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's something that we talked about with Jamie briefly in the mistakes episode about there being punishments for dying, which is the biggest mistake you can make.
Yeah.
And I think the balance is probably somewhere in between the gritty realism and having debuffs for going down.
Yeah.
And it's something that my players have not taken for granted, but a bit lackadaisical about being knocked down to 0 HP. They're fairly confident that someone will get them up, and I probably need to impose a bit more on that. Just to really be like, yeah, okay, although there's a 50.5% chance that you might be okay in 4 hours, there's also a 49.5% chance that you'll be dead forever. So, you know, there's got to be a cost there. And not only is it time, because if you're left to stabilize yourself, you get up in maybe 1 to 4 hours, or 2 to 5 hours, I think.
Is that? Yeah, I can't remember.
Yeah, if you're basically stabilized, so not healed, you roll a d4, and it's a d4 plus 1, and that's when you regain consciousness.
Right. Okay.
Just by naturally, you've been knocked out for that length of time.
And Constitution brings you back.
Yeah, you get 1 HP at the end of that time. That's rules as written.
Cool.
Versus, like, no, you can be dead forever. So there's, yeah, they've probably been a little bit chill about that.
Yeah.
And I need to maybe reinforce a little bit of, yeah, okay, it's a stupid, goofy world sometimes, and there's a Grogs and a Dwarf Bucks coffee, but if you die, you die. If you die, you die.
If you die, you die.
And then talking of rests and, you know, the alternative rules for rests, there's some other thoughts, and I'd like to get your idea on of people have said before that like leveling up shouldn't be instant. So basically there's the two kind of extremes are XP based, and literally the moment you ding, you level up then and there, and you get a second wind and your health comes back and you can turn the tide of combat and everybody's happy. Versus people that are like, no, it's milestone based. When the characters have learned enough in universe and have shown to apply that knowledge, then, and here's the meat, is that they need to, you can't just like level up instantly or even over a long rest. They need to spend some time basically like writing up notes or practicing moves or studying your books.
Yeah.
Which I kind of like.
Yeah.
As an idea, I haven't put it into practice. It's probably a bit too late to impose that now on my players, but I'd like to maybe try it sometime in a longer campaign to say, you know, you're now ready to level up when you get a chance to do so.
Oh, that's really, really tough, because going back to the very beginning of this podcast when we were talking about how over time things change, that makes so much sense for your leveling up process to be a process, not an instantaneous thing, and you just go through and change it all. You learn with experience and time and effort, and then you have these new skills. Personally, I don't think I'd like that very much. In theory, it sounds really good and sounds like it would be quite an interesting way of developing your character. But at the same time, I play a lot of RPG games for the leveling. That's like the like instant bit of serotonin that you enjoy when you level up, and it's so exciting. And having to then go through on D&D Beyond and change all of your stats and roll your HP and figure out what, if you want to ASI or if you want to take a feat. That, for me, doing all that in one kind of session is really fun. I enjoy that kind of process. But again, taking the time to put RP into, say, you spend time with like a master of the craft to learn this particular kind of feat, and you go through like a process with them, that would be interesting as well. So yeah, that's a real tough question, because me as a person, me as a player of the game, I get a lot of joy out of the leveling process, but as like a thinking critically about it.
Oh, nice. I'll Venmo you the £10 after the podcast.
Thanks, mate. as like a intellectual exercise, that is really interesting, and I think it would be a very enjoyable process as well. So that's really tough. I'm not quite sure where I'd stand on that kind of leveling process. Mate, you hit me with a doozy at the end. Oh my God.
It's awkward. Like you're trying to have your cake and eat it with your instant leveling up, but also the more you put in, the more you get out, kind of thing. So I can see why you're now in internal conflict.
I'm in dilemma.
Yeah, it's tricky. I think a lot of people will probably play it as a game, and so therefore the level ups are about as concrete you can get as to say positive feedback to say we're doing things that are right and good and well, and I've now been rewarded for that by having more HP and so on and so on. I don't know, I think it's a good idea on paper. I think implementing it in practice might be very difficult to do well, because I imagine it's a piece of cake, especially if you have to do it 6, 7, 8 times, and that's for a decent length campaign, that even that might not be enough. But have this, okay, my 4 players, each one of you, we now have to roleplay a week's worth of stuff. And I could just see that very easily being like, okay, well, a week passes and you level up. And now it's mechanically no different to just leveling up overnight anyway. So apart from you've just made them lose a week, well, that almost seems like you're bringing in this rule just to make them waste time at that point.
Yeah, which is really, really tricky. Like, I think if, for example, like a lot of people do play D&D for a podcast and for entertainment purposes, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
and to play obviously as well. If your campaign is more around the entertainment value and the enjoyment of the story, then that would make more sense for your campaign as such, because you could spend a lot of time with those characters and build in like a montage process, if you like, of how they would level up and do that kind of serious thing, and that would be quite cool as like a concept. But if you're playing the game for enjoyment purposes as well, you'd have to be so careful to not make it just almost like a punishment for leveling up and using that extra time to like develop the character in that manner. Oof, that's really really hard. But it would be interesting to explore. I mean, you have to try it, wouldn't you? You have to try it and see how it goes.
You definitely need the players who are on board with kind of heavy-ish roleplay to fill that gap. Because I've got players that would just go, "I'd just do nothing for a week. Can we move on?"
Yeah,
which is fine. But then why would you bother implementing it then?
Yeah, for sure.
So you started with this episode of saying basically time is this thing that no one really knows, and there's a human construct almost in a way. I mean, it is, but it isn't. But it's one of those tricky things of trying to nail jelly to the wall.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. Yeah.
I don't think I made that up. I think I've heard that somewhere else. Just for the record. And it's that duality of it is, but ultimately we're all still spending our time playing the game. And one thing we spoke about with Simon was that we play it to have fun, and it's a happy time, and we enjoy it. So it's a really nice bridge to say, spend that time in a worthwhile endeavour that you enjoy. And I guess what I'm trying to loop back round to is what Simon said, is that if you're not having fun, then don't waste your time doing it.
100%.
Which it sounds dumb, right? But the amount of people that don't do that, I think you might be surprised.
Yeah, you can very easily know if you're wasting time on an element of D&D if you find yourself getting distracted by it or not engaging fully with it. And if it disengages you or your players from what you're doing, then it's not worth your time. It's a very easy little key for if a concept or if something you want to do in a game should work or not. If people are engaged by it and people want to actually try it, then 100%. But if as soon as you feel yourself getting bored by it and not thinking and not focusing properly on it, then it's probably not worth your time.
And obviously, as we mentioned earlier on, like time is this kind of entropic force
Yeah.
in the universe. I think the two are intrinsically linked to say you can't have one without the other one. And that as time goes on, things degrade and so on and so on.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can put it in a more eloquent way than myself, how to employ that kind of mentality in a D&D game.
Well, the best way I can describe it is like a story-based thing. Like, there's so many philosophers and people who say deep things that talk about the time's journey and how life and things are a journey, and the journey that you go on is what's important. That perspective that you see things change, and the actual being in the moment of what's going around you is what's important, and our perception of that is what's important. At the end of the day, we can talk about time as this crazy construct and the mechanics of time in D&D, but it's how we perceive that, how we have fun with it, and what we do with like these cool concepts and stuff that is the enjoyable part. And I think that's what you should really focus on more than anything else is that kind of element of what do I need to spend my time on, what shouldn't I spend my time on, and what's fun. I guess. Yeah. I don't know if that made sense or not, but
you're speaking from the heart, which is what matters.
That's what I always do, mate. That's what I always do.
I got very excited with myself building this campaign and actually made a calendar to track the time.
Nice.
Which is stupid because that was a waste of time, ironically, because it's way simpler just to use like the Gregorian calendar that everybody's familiar with.
But did you enjoy spending your time on doing that?
Yeah.
Well, then it's not wasted, because that enjoyment that you got from spending the time creating that element of your campaign is time well spent for me, I'd say. Even if your characters don't use it, the enjoyment that you got out of it is also important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's nice. You've reassured me this afternoon. Yeah, I must admit I had, named all the months and different days in the week and this, that, and the other. I
mean, that's pretty impressive.
Here's what I'm trying to get at is that, like, in game, despite us playing the campaign now for 2 years, in game it's only been about 30 days.
Wow.
So it's and that's when I started tracking that, and I was about halfway through, and I said, let me try and transcribe these onto my calendar so I can see how far through the year they are. I was like, oh nope, still summer. So okay. Fine. I mean, I think they're about to go into my equivalent of autumn, essentially. Yeah. Harvest's Pride, which has probably been used everywhere else. But so I do use that as a tool to say like what the weather's like.
Yeah.
Rather than it's just a day. It's just a summer's day. So that's I wanted to end it on a high note, and unfortunately I've brought it all the way back down to literally calendar dates on in a diary.
I think I can bring it back. Like, some of the best RPG games that I've played, like Skyrim and stuff, they have their own calendar, and it is part of the lore, and it is part of the richness of the universe that's created. Some of the most awesome kind of universes that were ever created for stories have a ton of lore, like have languages that are like purposely made for those stories, like Lord of the Rings, like Star Wars, Star Trek, all the stuff that real nerds love so much. Even Warhammer 40k. I know that it's a sore subject here, but there are like channels and people dedicated to the nitty gritty lore of those universes that have been created by people. So it's never wasted when you go real deep into creating something like that and spending the time on that, because someone's out there will really enjoy that part of your creation. Yeah, which is why, as I said before, if you enjoy doing that part of it, someone else is going to enjoy that as well. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's used all the time in your campaign, but someone will appreciate it for sure.
Oh, thank you for that nice, thoughtful words at the end there. Funnily enough, as we're getting to the end of our time for this episode, is there anything you wanted to add? Is there any topics we didn't cover that you wanted to talk about?
No, not really. I feel like we covered a lot of interesting stuff there, and as rightly so with the discussion podcast, we went off on wild tangents.
Yeah, we really dipped and peaked and troughed in like moment to moment combat all the way up to,
what is time? Yes.
What am I in
what
D&D?
is existence? Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, okay. Is there anything you want to plug then?
Well, I'm sure it's been plugged on this podcast a couple of times already, but it can't hurt to do it a few more times. Yeah, me and Danilo are part of Dungeons, Dice and Dudes, which is our playthrough campaign of D&D that we've been doing now for like a year or so. Before my time. Yeah, you joined like a few sessions in, I think. A very welcome addition, might I add. Oh, thank you. Yeah, we have a lot of fun. The characters are pretty mental here and there, but yeah, if you like D&D and you've liked us talking about D&D and want to hear some people play D&D, then you can find us on Instagram or Twitter. Instagram is Dungeons, Dice and Dudes. Twitter is just dudes_dice. And on those social medias, you can find links to where you can listen to us. And yeah, we've got like 6 episodes out already, and we'll have a few more coming out in the future. Yep, if you want to hear about a young, arrogant wizard, you can listen to me play one in Quinn's boots. Yeah, that ties in nicely, yeah. Yeah, and this episode of my podcast is scheduled for actually New Year's Day. So I'll take this opportunity to wish everybody a Happy New Year. Yeah, Happy New Year. Hope you had a nice Christmas, however odd that it's been this year, but whatever. Indeed. Yeah, that's it for today's episode about time. If you have any thoughts or questions, please drop me a message on Twitter at Danilo_DND. Otherwise, thank you all for listening, and good night. Good night.